So, welcome to our sixth discussion of Hamlet, and therefore our discussion of Act 5. And then that leaves us next week. We can make large, comprehensive theses about what Shakespeare was and was not doing. But hopefully just make a lot of progress in reading. Just as a very brief initial suggestion, I'm going to share the handout I just sent around, and of which I have a few copies here. Thanks. Just to touch on the chronology, and I know that there must be suggestions or allusions in the text to time that I haven't picked up. So please let me know if you have any. But I'm going to make what I think I see, which is, if you look at this chronology page, there are basically three time periods that are dramatically presented. The first begins on the battlements at midnight, day one, right? 2 months after the funeral and the marriage. That's the first time period. Then we have, within a day of that, the ghost is seen a third time, because it's already been seen twice before. And then 2 months later, Act 2 begins. Roughly 2 months later, because in Act 1, Hamlet says it's been not yet 2 months since his father died. Actually, now is he saying his mother's just remarried scarcely 2 months after the father died? Is that what he's saying?
Yeah.
So then how long between the marriage and they're hanging around seeing ghosts?
Well, that's in the Branagh interpretation, it's the same day, right? But that's not true, because he just kind of conflates the wedding with the...
Well, he says, yes, the baked goods were used for the... Yeah. So that would make it within a week or something of the funeral. So that would put them both back a couple of months.
Yeah.
Okay, that's obviously rhetoric.
Yeah.
So we don't know.
Yeah.
So 2 months ago, the funeral occurred at some time not long. Yeah. No. Some period greater than 2 months ago, the elder Hamlet died. Barely 2 months later, Claudius and Gertrude married. Now we find out in the second time, and all of this occurs within 1 day up till the end of Act 1. That's all 2 days. Right. Act 2 begins going by Ophelia's comment that it's been twice 2 months since the death of old Hamlet. So that means it's been 2 months at least, possibly a lot longer, since the remarriage. And then on that one day and that one evening, we have everything from Act 2, Scene 1 to Act 4, Scene 4. Then we have a break. Hamlet's gone away. He comes back. In the meantime, Ophelia goes mad. Laertes comes back to get revenge for Polonius. And then within a few days of that, possibly within 1 or 2 days of that, Hamlet returns, and then everyone dies. Yeah. Any other suggestions?
No, thank you.
Yeah, I find it interesting that so much occurs on the one day, twice, from Act 2, Scene 1 to Act 4. Yeah, so we have 3 periods, all when everything happens within 1 or 2 days. Okay, so Act 5. Now, one of the things I realize that I'm doing when I discuss these things is I'm trying to understand why Hamlet brings about this catastrophe. My assumption is that when he dies, Horatio says, there dies a noble heart, something like that, after Hamlet dies. I'm pretty sure he says noble heart. It's my assumption that Hamlet is the most noble character in the play. But he causes a complete catastrophe. And now that we're in Act 5, we can compare the very basic aspect of human reality, which is that you are part of a political community. And that's very prominent from the first 3 seconds of Act 1, Scene 1, that the country clearly is in some danger because of Norway. The primary political or human task for anyone, especially anyone politically involved, i.e. the person second in line to the throne, is to preserve Denmark from Norway. And what does Hamlet do? He gives his dying voice to Norway, thereby destroying his own country's freedom. Right? So that's a catastrophe on the political human level. And also, the primary task he feels himself given is to remember his father by killing his murderer. And he does that, but on the way he manages to kill his ex-girlfriend, to kill her brother, and to kill his mother. So that's a catastrophic accomplishment. Right? Now, tragedy is of interest to us. I make these suggestions and you're all free to qualify or provide alternative explanations. But tragedy is of interest to us because the characters involved are A, noble, and B, that nobility itself leads to a catastrophe. That's my very basic assumption. And I realize that as I've been going, I'm looking for what's wrong with Hamlet. But my assumption is that he's still the noblest character here. And what does that nobility consist in? Precisely in this imagination. You'll notice in Act 1, at the end of Scene 4, he's about to run off after the ghost. And I now forget who it is, Horatio or Marcellus says, his imagination is working on him, which is very interesting because it might mean that Hamlet is seeing more in the ghost than they do. But it also is exactly the characteristic, the intellectual imagination is the characteristic that makes him so impressive, that he can discuss the human being in such comprehensive, all-enveloping terms, and then simultaneously undercut it. And we get that imagination, and in this scene where Horatio says, "'Twere to consider too curiously, to consider so." Precisely when Hamlet's saying, imagine that this dirt was Alexander, becomes a worm, and so forth. But it's that imagination that makes him impressive. But, so I want to make that very clear because I am operating from the point of view that he is the most noble person here. If you look at, and tragedy is, tragedy implies, if nobility implies self-destruction, it either means that the kind of nobility that doesn't involve self-destruction is rare or impossible. Now, if you look at, say, the classic texts for what kind of character you should have, which is Aristotle's Ethics, then tragedy is always possible. There's always a possible conflict between goods that we want, including excellences that we want. But to be excellent is to be, I wouldn't say enviable, but admirable. So it's to be, he takes the clue to happiness to be human excellence, but in a way that you would admire. So not someone who's just happy because they're rich, or spacious in the possession of dirt, which is how Hamlet describes Osric. He has contempt for that. And that's a kind of nobility, to look beyond mere possessions. Of course, he is in a position by birth and therefore by custom that people defer to him and his opinions matter, and so on. He happens to be a noble character, but it's built on custom. And so his continual deprecating custom is also in tension with his own self. Okay. Now, I just, yeah, that's just my preliminary. And because I think when everyone dies at the end, who would you most like to be? I think Hamlet, Ophelia, or Laertes, i.e. dead. But you don't want to be dead, but those are the people who, I assume, you would most like to be like. You don't want to be like Claudius.
Horatio.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Horatio. Horatio appears to, and this is one of the things that we're going to watch Branner's part of the end of Act 5, and there's a few things where he takes an interpretation that I think we can take a very different interpretation. And one of the things is, because he says, I'm more an antique Roman than a Dane, he takes that to mean he's someone always with his head in a book, he can't really act in the world, he's kind of feeble, and that's just completely false. I mean, we have this ridiculous thing, it's been prominent, not prominent, but it came into being after the First World War, that we divided literacy from excellence in sport and at fighting. And those two things have always gone together. I mean, not like the Mongols weren't reading Keats on the way across the Eurasian steppes and so on, but in the Western tradition, just it's a complicated term, but the peak has always been combining literary and intellectual excellence with ethical or heroic excellence. That's been the aim. But the First World War was such a disaster that people thought we have to get rid of our education system. And so that became a kind of a feat thing for literary types. And then the sporting types went their own way to the disadvantage of both. Do you want to grab that?
I really have a problem with you saying that his thoughts and I have a problem, coping with your saying that in his imagination and in his thinking, he is noble, right? But does that make a noble man if his actions are horrid, like, for example, his treatment of Ophelia? Surely a man is judged by his actions, not by what goes on in his head.
Well, a lot of people think that you are judged. For example, one of the things we're now just about to discuss at the gravedigger scene is intention, right? And that becomes, historically, that becomes very important with Christianity. Intention. Yeah. Your deliberate intention. And that also comes up in Hamlet's speech to Laertes later on. So it's not just actions. Whereas I think even in the classical world, though, it's speech and deed. Yeah, that's your judgment is based upon your speeches and your deeds. And if your deeds fall well below your speeches, then there's something wrong.
Yes.
Right? And so if your speeches are edifying and your deeds are catastrophic, then there's a problem. Now, but I'm completely agreeing that there is something has gone terribly wrong with Hamlet.
Yes.
Yeah, but that he is noble. But I'm still saying that. Yeah. See, this is the thing. So if this was a play about someone who we regard simply as criminal, and I immediately think of 25 people, but we may not agree. Daniel Andrews. Say Daniel Andrews was run over by a car. That's just like a bad person gets killed. It's nothing significant. There's no tragedy. A sniper takes out Joseph Stalin. It's not a tragedy. It's just fantastic good luck, because it means that tyranny is going to be a bit shorter. But a tragedy. I'm just suggesting that tragedy requires that someone noble is destroyed.
Yeah, I'm following Margarita's argument. I think that Hamlet was just in a horrible situation, horribly torn and terribly worked up. I don't like the way he treated Ophelia at all, but he did. If you listen to the grave scene, that he was madly in love with her. Obviously, I think he must have planned to have her as his queen. He was exhorting her to go to a nunnery. Get thee to a nunnery. This is a foul place, It's a villainous villainous place to be. Denmark is a jail and all that.
Yes.
So I think what's ennobling about Hamlet is that he finally forgives Laertes. I find that hard.
He forgives Laertes.
Yeah.
Doesn't he have to ask forgiveness?
Laertes does.
Why does Laertes have to get forgiveness from Hamlet?
Because Laertes took the poisonous,
Oh, at the very end.
at the very end. We'll be
Fair
facing
enough,
that
yes.
tonight. Yeah, I
Yes.
think, to forgive them.
No, he's got a certain generosity of heart,
They're not.
but he does certain acts that go radically against that.
Oh,
And we're going to examine those acts. For example, against Ophelia, I mean, I tried to trace a few quotes in the first or second class that show, from what I remember, and please tell me if you see a passage that doesn't fit this, whenever he talks about desire, it's low, like human carnal desire. It's always low except for one instance, and that's when his mother was married to his father, right? And that in that first soliloquy, when he says, "I wish that this too solid flesh would melt and resolve itself into a dew," there's that one, and it's only that instance. Now that's gone because the father's dead, and the fact that the mother is remarried, he can only put that down to carnal desire, and that is what makes him profoundly pessimistic about everything.
yeah.
Well, yeah, you could say crass, but because he sees the flesh as the source of A, vulnerability, and B, corruption through desire.
Yeah.
And that's behind what his mother does. And he dwells endlessly on this with both Ophelia and female desire with Ophelia and the mother. But that's because regeneration or generation of children is merely the propagation of our evil stock, of our bad nature. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that excuses it, but it's this view of the world that is the cause.
Right. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
No.
Is that your angry by that? Okay. No, that's all right, yeah.
Now, if we just start Act 5, Scene 1, I've shared the screen here. If you have, everyone, just make sure we have different text so we can all. Nice. Okay, so the gravedigger. Now, there's a few things I want to point out, and then to leave us time to watch the end, which will be at least 25 minutes. So please bring up things that you want to discuss on the way through. So the first line: "Is she to be buried in Christian burial when she willfully seeks her own salvation?" Which is already a contradiction, right? If you seek your own death, then you're going to be damned, not saved, right? In this understanding that they're operating within. But that's typical of the gravedigger's play on language, which brings out interesting things, even as it sounds like it's misspoken. And in the fourth line, "The crowner," that is the coroner, "hath sat on her." Now, my note dutifully tells me this means the coroner hath sat on her case, but it's meant to be a joke. Like this is how the great, it's depicted as if the coroner sat on her body, right? Okay, then the gravedigger says, "How can that be unless she drowned herself in her own defense?" Now, the gravedigger says it must be, and then you can see in the text that we're using the angled brackets, it's a se offendendo. That's because there is there's an expression, se defendo, which means defending oneself. Se is the reciprocal, reflective pronoun. So defending oneself, it must be defending oneself, but but the text in F has se offendendo, which is offending oneself. And the Q2, which I wrote down, has it must be so offended, which this is why the editors prefer the folio reading. It must be so offended. It must be that she's so offended against herself, but it makes better sense, especially in the fact that they're using all these quibbles and qualifications. that he's invented a new law, and that's as contradictory as seeking your own salvation by suicide.
I mean, it's funny because he. I mean, he's hilarious because he's someone who knows a little and makes much of it. I mean, he's pretending to know the law, like he's just making stuff up. Yeah.
Yeah. He appears to get it all right though. No, I'm joking. He's making it up. He's making it up. He's made up an offence, say offendendo, if the folio. And I haven't read about this, but there's apparently a case in like 1564 or something where Lord somebody or other killed himself by drowning, which might remind us of someone. And there was a big law case about his inheritance because people wanted it. And so there was a big discussion on what constitutes suicide, and they divide an act into imagination, resolution, and perfection, that is the completion of the act. Whereas here, it's got an act it had three branches: to act, do, and perform. It appears to be just tautologist. And our goal, they've got variations of that across the text, which appears to be a sheer invention for ergo, therefore. It doesn't appear to be any other word that can make sense for. Okay, so then the grade gives a more extended account of how you can kill yourself in your own defense if the water comes to you. Now, Paul Cantor makes the suggestion that this is an anticipation of scene 2, where Hamlet dies at the hands of others, where I've been suggesting, because it seems to me from the first 2 lines of the first soliloquy that he's contemplating suicide. He hasn't decided for it, and in fact, because it's banned, he doesn't want to do it. But then he finds a way to make the water come to him. That's a possibility. That's a possibility. But we're going to come to his decision to go ahead and have it all fencing match shortly. But what I do want to insist, though, is that this apparently comic interlude has bearing on everything that's being discussed, and I think that's very clear when we look at the topics that are discussed. But we'll get there shortly. Now, so the first topic is suicide that the 2 grave diggers are discussing, and then it's a gentleman or a gentlewoman in contradistinction to your average citizen or your even Christian. And immediately following that is the question of arms or heraldry. So you could purchase arms. That is your own, your own arms. You can to stamp onto letters and to have on your doorpost and so on. And apparently Shakespeare was involved with the purchase of his father's suit of arms, which they did this in the 15 years prior to this play. So it's something he knew about and participated in. And we get the contrast jokingly made between heraldry and arms and the biblical tradition with Adam. So the connection between the two is a joke. You can't dig without arms. Right? There is a tension between the political desire for recognition and honour and the biblical tradition. And the tension is that in the one world, you want honour because you want to live on in your name when you're dead. So they both teachings recognise the ephemerality of human life, but one does so in the light of immortal longings. That's Anthony's expression for it in Anthony and Cleopatra. Immortal and a deathless name is what Socrates says in the Plato's Symposia. A deathless name. So you die, but your name lives on, right? But that's the highest thing you can get in this world, from the political point of view, not from the philosophical point of view. Whereas in the Christian teaching, that glory too is ephemeral. And that's in the light of what's eternal. And now we have an eternal, which didn't exist on this side. Right? So these things are in tension. There's a different understanding. And that tension is what Hamlet exhibits. Because he is continually, there are two things motivating him. Right? One is a desire for honour. So when he refers to why did God give us that discourse of reason, his immediate explanation of that is to use it for, if not to use it, to become glorious in this world. That's his last soliloquy at the end of Act 4. Right? It's not to understand things, right? That's completely outside the question. Why? Because there is nothing beautiful to understand in this world. It's an unweeded garden. Right? Whereas on the classical side, we have this discourse of reason because our mind is commensurate with the intelligible whole of which we are a part. And the full use of our faculties is the understanding of that whole. That doesn't exist. Right? The eternity has been taken somewhere else. Okay. Now, so we've had heraldry is the kind of link between the two worlds, the political and the Christian. Right? And then the question is that the gravedigger asks at line 42, what is he that builds stronger than the mason, the shipwright, or the carpenter? That is, what lasts? What human activity or action or production actually lasts, given that the world is like this? And the first gravedigger has the good answer, gallows, and the other one says, thou dost ill. This is at line 48 to 9. Thou dost ill to say the gallows is built stronger than the church. But then he provides an answer that lasts longer than the church, because these are things that may be destroyed, and that's the grave. Okay, so that provides that's an illumination of the ephemerality of everything. Everything returns to dust, etc. There's a song which I just want to compare. So the gravedigger, the other one goes away to get some alcohol, and the second one starts singing. This is at line 73 to 6. But age with his stealing steps hath clawed me in his clutch, and have shipped me into the land as if I had never been such. That is, I, human being, am ephemeral, turned to dust. Right? Now, my commentary says this is a version of a popular song, and they quote two different verses that are conflated here. If I can find it. Yeah, okay, so the first is, for age with stealing steps, right? That's almost the first line here. Hath clawed me with his crutch, second line. And lusty life away she leaps, as there had been none such, and leaps away from the life of lust, right? Second verse, for beauty with her band these crooked cares hath wrought, and shipped me into the land from whence I first was brought. So beauty attracts you into cares and eventually you die, just to summarize. But there's no beauty. Beauty is replaced by age. There's only age. Remember the first of the 7 things to complain about why life is like suffering. The first is time, right? And age. Time leads to the destruction of all things flesh, of all things human. And it's not relieved by the experience of beauty. In the same way that in Hamlet's life, his vision of things is not relieved by his love for Ophelia. Okay. Now, when Hamlet responds to this guy singing this song and digging up a skull at line 77, he says, "That skull had a tongue in it and could sing once. How the knave jails it to the ground as if it were Cain's jawbone that did the first murder." Now, that appears to mean that he's going to say, look, that was a living human being. It could have been this noble, that beautiful, this interesting person, and who he is treating unjustly. That is not what he does. What he does, he provides 3 depictions of people who deserve to be punished. This is his vision of the world. Like, not only is this our fate, but we deserve our fate. Right? So the first example, this might be the pate. Pate is the head of a politician, which this arse now overreaches. One that would circumvent God. A politician who tries to escape judgment by, hoarding up money and power and not having to go to court even when you run people over on their bike. Or a courtier at line 84, which could say, "Good morrow, sweet Lord, how dost thou, sweet Lord?" Right, so a flatterer. So the first one's, a corrupt politician. The second one, a flattering, that is a lying courtier. This might be Lord such a one that praised my Lord such a one's horse when he went to beg it. That is someone who, compliments something because they want to give it as a gift. So 3 people who aren't admirable. It's just striking that he's saying this person is treating these people as if they are sinners, and then he produces 3 sinners. And then at line 90, "Why even so? And now my lady worms, chapless and knocked about the mazard." The mazard is also the head, I think. Someone's got a note, they can confirm that. "With a sexton spade. Here's fine revolution."
Head.
Sorry?
Head.
Head. "Here's fine revolution, that is, if we had the trick to see it." I don't know if is like the in Greek that you use as a modal particle with conditional sentences. I don't know why we have for if. I don't know if anyone does. But, anyway, but it means if. So here's fine revolution. And it's striking because there will be a revolution within less than 40 years from when this play is performed. And it's not absolutely impossible that Shakespeare had something to do with it, because he provided an articulation of English history through the history plays, an articulation of what a republic is like and how it gets destroyed in Coriolanus and Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra. And the praise of it seems to be praise of a republic in the Roman plays. And that was definitely one of the inspirations. Well, the notion of a classical republic was one of the inspirations behind the revolution in 1640.
Do we know if this practice of digging up graves is common, or is it just because of Ophelia needs it somewhere to be deposited? Yeah.
I don't know. Has anyone seen a note or anything in why are we digging up people to make room in the special part of the graveyard for the gentle people?
Yeah.
It's not a pauper's grave, it's a sinner's grave, traditionally, the suspected suicide.
Yes, but as the grave diggers established at the beginning, therefore make her grave straight, because they've agreed that it's Christian burial.
Oh.
But her rights are maimed, to use Laertes' term. When he comes in, he says, well, Hamlet says, with such maimed rights, like why is this person getting not their full funeral?
Yeah. A scant burial,
Now, at line 100, there's another skull. Why may not that be the skull of a lawyer? Where be his quiddities now? Now, a quiddity is it's a Latin quidditas, means thatness. Right? And that's the Latin translation for ousia, beingness of a thing. Right? That's how it enters the vocabulary. It then becomes a word meaning something, you can use it as like a lawyer's quibble or something, although I don't know how many more references you get than here. But he's clearly touching both upon the law, because there's all these legal terms following, and upon that sort of late scholasticism, which had a very refined vocabulary, and which it's possible to make the suggestion that sometimes problems are done away with by making distinctions, which is, a philosophical maneuver of great antiquity. Even Aristotle, a thing is in one way potentiality, and another way it's actuality. But it's the same thing. So what is it? It's hard to, sometimes it's, or Kant, noumena, phenomena, looking at the same thing in two completely different ways. Which one is it? Okay. But often these distinctions get you out of a lot of trouble. I particularly like the line at line 108, which is in the folio. Is this the fine of his fine? So a fine is not not a penalty you pay for because you were parking for too long, but some kind of a contract by which you can demand back a loan or something. Is this the fine is this the fine as in the end of his fines, that is his contracts, and the recovery of his recovery as in what you gain from your recoveries, that is these your legal obligations. To have his fine pate, his noble head, full of fine that is powdery dirt. Yeah, it's amusing when it's done well. So at line 110, will his vouchers vouch him no more of his purchases, and his double ones too, than the length and breadth of a pair of indentures? An indenture is a contract, and you tear it in half so that it has a particular jagged edge, and only that's how you prove that you own this half of the contract. The same thing in ancient Greek, like in Greece, you snap apart a ceramic thing and you have the half, and it's called a symbolon, because we get our word symbol. If you can match it up, you can prove that you're owed the money or whatever. Janet, do you want to?
Oh, I just wanted to comment on why do you think this is in prose, not in poetry, whereas most of his other speeches are
The grave diggers?
No, Hamlet's speech here, where he's talking about all this. Is it because it's a legal discussion?
Oh, right.
I'm just curious that it's not in poetry, it's prose. So is it because it's mimicking a legal discussion?
That's a good suggestion, yeah. I haven't got a better one.
Yeah, I didn't notice that.
Although it's not a soliloquy though. It's not. It's still a conversation with Horatio, isn't it?
Right. So is it only soliloquies that are in?
Yeah.
Is that
maybe?
It's not. Not only soliloquies that are in verse, though. Yes.
But this one's exactly a conversation.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
I mean, no, it's not.
It's a statement, though, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it is him. Expressing his brilliant observations about everything, but it is very much with somebody else rather than just he is there.
Well, actually, we'll come to a contrast shortly, because we'll come back to this point in 2 seconds. I just want to look at one passage at line 140, and then we'll go ahead to where he goes in and out of rhyme, which I think we can discuss to make more sense of. So at line 140, when he's finally established that the grave is for a woman, or for someone who formerly was a woman, Hamlet says how absolute that is, how strict the nape is. We must speak by the card. No one knows what card means. It could be that's like by the chart, and at that time, as in our time, They have charts of declensions or whatever it is.
With precision.
Yeah, with precision. Yeah, by the book. Or equivocation will undo us. By the Lord, Horatio, this 3 years I have took note of it. The age is grown so picked that the toe of the peasant comes so near the heel of the courtier, he gores his kibe. A kibe being a sore on your heel. Apparently quite common at the time. I have no idea why. 3 years, I don't know, I have no idea what that refers to. But in the last 3 years, the peasantry, well, the distinction between classes is becoming blurred because of people's presumption and speech. Okay, but now let's go forward to where, skipping over. So yeah, just if you look at what Hamlet asks, he asks, first of all, who's being buried here? How long have you been a grave maker? How did Hamlet, i.e. myself, go mad? And how long does a body last in the grave? These are his interests, right? So forget the particular interest of who's being buried. As soon as he establishes this is a grave maker of some experience, he wants to know how long a body lasts, because everything perishes, and that's the truth of things. The truth is the perishing, not the momentary beauty or nobility. Okay, but let's go ahead to where he extends that reflection past Yorick. I trust everyone's seen Kenneth Branagh or somebody else holding up a skull and saying, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio. If we go to 209, which for those of you in different texts, is where Hamlet's talking to Horatio. At 204, he says, dost thou think Alexander looked at this fashion in the earth, that is, after he was dead? Does that really matter for Alexander? And then at 209, he says, to what base uses we may return, Horatio? Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till he find it stopping a bunghole? Horatio says, 'twere to consider too curiously to consider so. But I think it's that curious imagination is precisely what makes Hamlet impressive, that he can see all these things in the particulars he confronts. Now, it's also because his imagination is steeped with a kind of, you could say, whatever you like, you can say misinterpretation or an interpretation, but he's taken some aspects of a Christian view, and I gave you that quote, those quotes describing some aspects of Luther, and with along with the references to Wittenberg, it's being suggested to us that there's some connection between a Protestant view and Hamlet's view, which makes sense to me. So anyway, but whether it's an interpretation or misinterpretation, or Hamlet has a kind of, he's struggling with a Christian view of the cosmos in which there is an eternal God who is perfect, and then but that means that perfection is almost drained out of human life, or all life, and it becomes defective. Now, okay, so Hamlet then says, no faith, not a jot, but to follow him thither with modesty enough and likelihood to lead it. So it's not pure imagination, it's likely, right? As thus, Alexander died, Alexander was buried, Alexander returneth to dust, the dust is earth, of earth we make loam, and why of that loam whereto he was converted might they not stop a beer barrel? Imperious Caesar, dead and turned to clay, might stop a hole to keep the wind away. So we turn from prose to verse, and here the verse, two more lines, oh, that earth which kept the world in awe should patch a wall to expel the winter's flaw. So what do you think the verse is doing here?
Yeah, well, we have that too. I honestly couldn't really get line 210. why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till he find it stopping a bunghole?
Yep.
But he takes us through that, doesn't he? In this, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the sort of thing we turn to. If I got buried in a particular place near a winery, I might end up part of a bunghole.
Yeah.
That's what he's pointing out. Some kind
Yeah,
of.
so he's saying, isn't that likely?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure, you're agreeing with
That's what
Hamlet
yeah.
against Horatio. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Horatio isn't always practical I love Horatio, but I don't think he's always practical. Hamlet.
But here we're talking about imagination rather than practice, yeah?
Who? Horatio.
You and I, because
Yeah.
we're discussing
Yeah.
Hamlet's tracing in imagination
Yeah.
Alexander to the bunghole.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's a perfect possibility. I mean,
It's perfectly. Yeah, I just didn't understand what you meant by practical because
yeah.
this is more imaginative than practical.
Or pragmatic.
Yeah, because practical or pragmatic would be, I've got to get something to stop the bunghole, but tracing the Alexander to that's an intellectual act, yeah?
Yeah.
Is that, okay.
Right, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Verse is a bit of a parody, isn't it?
That's what I think, yeah. Like you take someone like an Alexander and you undercut it, the verse helps to make a little jingle out of how he's actually just dust. I think that's right. I think that's right.
These are just throughout the play, though, just for that lower audience to get the theme of whatever is. Whenever they transition, they need to summarize it for a different person in the audience. That's just what it seems like. Is that what we're asking about? Like that's why.
Why does Hamlet or anyone, transition into and out of verse?
And I think it's just for the purpose of the audience's memory of the gist of that passage. I don't know if that's a stupid way to think about it, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, all these comic scenes are all for the audience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, they are, the light relief, but it's also, okay, you're going to get this bit. And that's why it's so full of references to England rather than, or some imagined Denmark. But, I mean, my books has that note about the 3 years. That it's a reference to the poor law which came into effect in England 3 years before. The poor law.
The poor law.
Yeah. This is a period where there were lots of more laws, protecting children, like the Children's Act came in around this period. And it's about.
That's a very precise thing to say. Like this is a reference to the poor law, and that's.
But it is this kind of, it's just a general comment that would have been got by a lot of people because it's the mood of the age.
Yeah. I think things go back the other way once James comes in.
Yeah.
Because the theatres which were open to everyone then become much more like a nobleman's entertainment thing. This is.
I find too the run into alcohol interesting. The complete depletion of a person down to a bunghole, but it's in a beer barrel and so on. We do get to tend to think. I have. I didn't, but because I don't hold alcohol well, as it happens. But I can get to a stage where I would just want alcohol to drop me out, and I think Shakespeare's having a play on that too myself. That in the depletion of humanity and depletion of our feelings, we go there, but Hamlet doesn't. We go to drink, we go to drugs, we go to,
No,
I just find it interesting.
He's definitely
and that's how they all end up in poisons and drinks.
Yes. Yeah, he's rough on people who drink a lot.
I mean, that's what saved him as well. When he doesn't have that drink.
Yeah, it saves him for several seconds. Okay, now the next part of the scene begins at line 223 to 4, where the funeral comes in, as he says at line 226, with such maimed rites. This is obviously Ophelia. Now, the priest explains at lines 234, 233 and following the reason, which is that 236, who should in ground unsanctified have been lodged till the last trumpet.
The priest would say that, wouldn't he? Because that's the Catholic tradition.
Yeah. And I think, where does he say that, this is more than would ordinarily be done if it wasn't for the commandment, presumably came from the king.
Yeah, it's Judeo.
Yeah, okay. Where's that? Actually, you've got a different text anyway. Okay, so Laertes jumps in the grave. Now, my opinion about Laertes has changed with this reading of the play. I took him to be far more straightforward, not political, but straightforwardly, in his action. So he comes home to get revenge for Polonius, stirs up a lot of people and attacks. He's persuaded by the king that the king is not responsible. But the thing is, he delays enough to be persuaded, whereas if he acted like Achilles or Achilles' son, he just would have killed the king. Or if he So, and not only that, but then he doesn't challenge Hamlet to a duel or something. He not only falls in with the king's plan to secretly murder Hamlet, but he contributes his own portion, which is that he'll poison the sword. So he's really just as much in this extremely confused world that the king embodies. A human being to double business bound, who decides, I'm going to forget one of those businesses so I can get on with this business. Now, if anyone wants to read any of these lines because they're mysterious or interesting or whatever, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to get to them quickly because I want to get to some other passages. Just to not, Gertrude improves in one's opinion, I think, over the play. She takes Hamlet's side from Act 3, and by Act 5, like now, she when Laertes burst in Act 4, she says, here when they struggle, she says it's just his madness. After a while, he's quiet as a dove, and so on, which is not true. But yeah, there's this beautiful scene when they do try to outdo each other in their grief. And Hamlet, this is up 294 in our text, page 257. He says, what would you do? X, Y, Z, eat a crocodile. And at 294, he says, I'll do it. Dost thou come here to whine, to outface me? Now, this is my suggestion, is that there's one of the main things that keeps drawing him to act is his sense of desire for recognition, thumos, desire for honor, not a desire for justice. He doesn't try and, his attempt to bring his father's killer to justice fails, partly for lack of action. But when he's affronted like this, he says, be buried quick, that is, be buried alive with her, and so will I. If thou prate of mountains, let them throw millions of acres on us, and so on. Now the Queen says at line 302, she's now covering for him, this is mere madness, and thus a while the fit will work on him, anon as patient as the female dove, when that her golden couplets are disclosed, his silence will sit drooping, which I don't think we've seen.
What's the golden couplets?
Yes, can you tell me what the Arden?
Pair of young, the dove lays 2 eggs, and the new hatched birds have yellow golden down.
The
Hatchlings.
2 hatchlings,
2
okay.
hatchlings.
Oh, pigeon there, do they have 2 eggs, do they? Oh, right, thank you.
Okay, so this is at the end of scene 1. Now, what is he at 3:09 to 11? Hamlet's just said, you know, I loved you ever, but it is no matter. Let Hercules himself do what he may. The cat will mew and dog will have his day. What is he saying?
It is what it is. Hercules succeeded in all his tasks, didn't he? Sisyphus is forever stuck. Anyway, life goes on, a cat will mew and a dog will have his day. What does a dog do there? Bark. What's a dog day? Dog days. What's dog days? That's famous, dog days.
That's summer in
Summer.
Greece.
Ah, okay.
Okay, we'll leave that. So,
That's the sense of it, like, you know,
Yeah.
they're just going to do what they're going to do.
okay, if that is the sense,
Yeah.
then
Who's the dog? Is that Hamlet?
that's what I was thinking. Who is the dog?
He's going to get his revenge.
Yeah.
Isn't that the, yes,
Possibly.
My turn will come.
yeah, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I just don't see how it works, but
The cat will mew, I mean, he's making such a noise and a fuss. He's beating his chest and he's
Yeah.
trying to.
we have to use that. That's right.
I'm just saying Laertes is beating his chest and carrying on about all what he's doing, so he's the cat mewing, and the dog who's lying in wait, Hamlet, will get his revenge.
Okay, Act 5.
Actually, I should say there are two revenges, two different revenges, aren't they?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just curious by, you know, it's really touching, especially the way David Tennant does it. Where he turns to Laertes and he's going like, "What's up, dude? Why are you so angry with me?"
Sure, I'll kill your father.
Well, that's it. I mean, how does he not get that? No, he is mad.
But Hamlet didn't mean to kill his father.
Laertes has had his ear filled by the king,
Yeah.
who has been saying, look, this mad person's killed your father, you've got to get him. You know.
I don't know if this is a distraction, but one thing I've been thinking of is why he included the curtain that he kills him through. Like, I get in terms of plot and stuff, but I just like wonder, like, I don't know, if it's like a wanky word, but it's like symbolically, like what's happening there. Like, why does? Yeah, I don't know if you've just got anything. I haven't read anything about it, but yeah.
What do you mean?
When Hamlet kills?
Yes, Polonius through the curtain.
Yeah. Like, what's the significance of that?
Because he couldn't mean to. It's
Yeah,
an accident.
yeah.
Unless you portray an accident, unless you kill someone.
Well,
Yeah.
because it is.
But many different ways you could portray it as an accident, I think. I don't know. I just
What's
think.
the better way?
Yeah, I don't know,
okay,
he turns a corner, or I don't know. It was just. I don't know. I was just wondering. That was the
So,
only thing I've been wondering.
Yeah,
It's something about like desire and stuff. Like he can't. Like he can't act on his. I don't know how to express it, but yeah.
Does it fit in with what he's saying here? So he's talking to Horatio, and he's saying, you remember what I was describing? I was on a boat being taken to England, right? And then he says at line 4, "Sir, in my heart there was a kind of fighting that would not let me sleep. Methought I lay worse than the mutines in the bilboes," which means what? Mutinies in the what? What's the bilboes? Rashly, and praise be rashness for it. Let us know, then interruption, right? I'm going to describe the principle behind my appreciation for my own rashness. Let us know our indiscretion, our lack of a considered act, right? Sometimes serves us well when our deep plots do poor. That is, when our considered planning does not reach fruition, right? Now, he only seems to act out of rash indiscretion, like the.
Yeah.
So is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah,
Like,
in the Branagh production, it really comes out because he just like, lunges at it, and he can't, fulfill any of his goals, like violent goals, calmly.
This is, this is, I think you're onto something, and I'm interpreting it this way, which is that because the world has no, beautiful things or principles in itself, like nature is an unweeded garden, then he's only, it doesn't make sense to act because fortune rules everything. On the one hand, either fortune rules everything, and then the other side of that coin is that everything is ordained. There's no middle ground of you have an intention in the light of a principle that can be successful or not, but that's what you should be doing. And so therefore he only ever acts out of rashness, as he does there.
Yeah. Because he can't kill Claudius in that calm moment that he has.
Right. He thinks it through and doesn't do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so here he says, and that should learn us, that should teach us, there's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will. Right, so he's gone from one extreme, which is that everything is fortune. Remember how he asked the player to speak that speech in which there was a denunciation of fortune. And in his own speech, in his the fourth of the 7 soliloquies, he says, what are the blows that patient merit of the unworthy take? So merit is always unrewarded, and people who without merit are rewarded. That's fortune, right? There is chance rather than justice. Dominates existence. So he sort of rails against that, and now he's come to the reverse of that, which is that everything is ordained and you can't fight it. In neither case can you act upon your considered discretion. And so there's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will. When he interprets that, which we'll come to shortly. So keep that in mind, and we're going to read a passage in a minute that follows up on this. But just to, so, and the example he has here is that he finds the letters that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have. And then, which he says, he calls that a royal knavery at line 21. Okay, yes, this is the king's criminal intent to kill the next in line to the throne. All right, so what does he do? Now, at line 33, he says, being thus benetted, that is caught in a net, benetted round with villainies, and or is another way of saying ear, which is another way of saying before. Before I could make a prologue to my brains, before I could take thought, right, they had begun the play. So we've just had a play in which a prologue comes out and says, this is what's going to happen, and then the play is performed. And what you should do when you think is that you make a prologue, I intend to do X, and then you figure out how you're going to do X. But he acts before he can make a prologue, before he can summarize what he wants to do, and then figure out how to do it. Before that, he writes a whole letter saying, have Rosencrantz and Guildenstern put to death, right? And then, and Horatio says at line 53, how was this sealed? How was this letter sealed? And Hamlet says, why, even in that was heaven ordinate. I had my father's signet in my purse, which was the model of that Danish seal. Now, is that an example of heaven's ordinance? It's about as chance as the fact that I happened to bring a pen and you brought a phone, and no, he deliberately has got he who has just declared himself when he jumps forward and introduces himself to the court, I, Hamlet the Dane, i.e. the King of Denmark, the rightful King of Denmark, he's been carrying around the signature, the ring that can give him the symbol of a royal command or whatever, or a letter. That's not an accident. That's not heaven's ordinance. That's his deliberate act. He's taken it from his father's desk or whatever. Right? So he has this confused way of seeing things. It's all fortune, it's all ordinance, and that tends to obliterate the possibility of human practical intelligence. As he says, before I can make a prologue to my brains, my brain had already begun the play, begun the act. Okay, and then Horatio, line 64, quite reasonably says, so Guildenstern and Rosencrantz go to it as if to say, if the king is doing this, why are they dying, right? And Hamlet says, 64, why, man, they did make love to this employment. They are not near my conscience. Their defeat does by their own insinuation. They have inserted themselves between the king and Hamlet. 'Tis dangerous when the baser natures come between the pass and fell and censored points of mighty opposites. Now, Horatio discreetly says, why would a king is this? Focusing upon the fact that the king's ultimately responsible, but Hamlet is responsible for the death of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern without any grounds, I think.
I read that as, you, the king, because, you would be the king, or, you're the potential king. I thought he was talking to Hamlet.
Meaning what a king you are?
Yeah, chiding him.
No, I don't think he, no. That's very subtle, but...
So is it in self-defense that Hamlet kills Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? Is that what yes.
How is it self-defense?
Oh, because they have a commission against Hamlet.
Yeah, but he doesn't have to kill them to avoid, he could just tear up the commission and throw it in the water.
Oh yes, but they'd be in terror of the king, goodness knows how.
They don't know what's in the
They
commission.
don't know about the commission.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's a sealed letter.
Yeah, it's a sealed letter.
right.
They've been given letters to take Hamlet. They're Hamlet's friends, right?
Yeah.
The king can't expect them not to tell Hamlet,
They're none too good friends, and he knows.
Can we throw down the...
Yeah, they're none too good friends. They're treacherous friends, and he knows it. Yeah. But that's all they've got to say.
Yeah, no, he knows he can't trust them because they've been called there by the king.
Yeah.
Remember, we're in such an insidious court where there's this phrase that Polonius uses when Hamlet's going to come for a walk, and he says, we, the king and I, Gertrude, go away. We lawful spies, lawful espials.
Yeah.
We will hide behind them. So it's, obviously, I don't know if there is a law in Denmark you're allowed to spy on anyone if you're on the side of the king. But it seems to be, at least it's the custom that everyone's spying on everyone. Everyone's being insidious, and this is one of the things that makes Hamlet admirable, is that he dislikes that. And he tries to be, there are moments where he is very frank and forthcoming and generous in ways that the others are hypocritical, flattering, lying.
Insidious.
Yeah, insidious.
Malicious.
But this is an example of him acting rashly and with complete, I think, injustice. Okay. These are two hapless, what do you call them? Not sycophants, flunkies. Or no, there's another word. Functionaries. It's not their fault that they're caught between these two powerful people, their childhood friend and the king. I think.
But do you think they could have resisted Claudius?
No.
You don't think do you think they're under orders from the king and therefore they...
They're weak and they're weak, so they wouldn't anyway. But they can't.
Because isn't there like a loyalty card, a loyalty, like they're loyal to Hamlet as friends, so they could somehow. Although I guess they don't know about the ghost and about Claudius being a murderer, so.
So is your suggestion that they could have been more like Horatio, who seems to be honest with Hamlet and more loyal, and also have still conversed with the king and said, well, we don't know what's going on. He's lost his library card and he seems cranky, whatever, yeah.
Yeah, something along those lines. Like they could have maybe behaved as loyal friends to Hamlet, although they're caught between a rock and a hard place because. Yeah.
I agree with that. I think that Horatio is the strong contrast with their behaviour, but that's still they're still caught in this position. They've got a royal command, and I don't know. I think they're in a. Well, he has more guts.
But
But I think so. What do you think?
The ghost.
well, profundity or guts, call it what you will. He's
Yeah.
got more of it, and that's what those chaps, the two Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, seem to lack. They seem to lack a profundity. They're more given to carousing and beer and whatever, you know. They're lighter in life, and then they become as branches in a wind. It's very sad for them too. I'll say.
No, but that marvelous scene where Hamlet loses his temper with them when he asks him to play the recorder, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, he was so angry with them.
Yes.
With reason, because they were so blatantly dishonest.
Yeah.
And so maybe he felt, oh, good, I can get them killed. Just like that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's at least ambiguous and possibly just simply unjust. And this is why Tom Stoppard's play is interesting to me. And if you see the movie, I think it's probably available on YouTube or something. He's a very inventive writer, Tom Stoppard. And what he's trying to do is show from the point of view of these two people that they're in this difficult situation, and which a lot of people are who aren't particularly evil, but who are compromised, by the powers about them.
Is Horatio bound in any way to Claudius or not? Like, it doesn't seem like Horatio. I'm just probably misunderstanding the plot, but he's not in a hard place the same way as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are.
Well, we don't get any scene where the king is saying, Horatio, what's going on? We do get a scene in Act 4 where the king addresses Horatio as if he's, just another trustworthy subject.
Yeah. But he's not being put in the same situation.
Yeah. Maybe the king recognizes he couldn't be, he couldn't be compromised, so I won't lean on him, I'll lean on someone else who's softer. Now, if we look, so Horatio, and I think Horatio is very discreetly deflecting attention from the fate. He's just asked about the fate of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and then there's no further use analysing that because this is what's happened. And so he says, what a king is this, as a deflection. Then Hamlet says, does it not think thee, that is, do you think, stand me now upon, he that hath killed my king and whored my mother, popped in between the election and my hopes, thrown out his angle for my proper life, and with such cozenage, is it not perfect conscience? Now, in Q2, in the second quarto, there's a full stop. Is it not perfect conscience? And the folio continues, to quit him with this arm, to kill him. And is it not damned to let this canker of our nature, that is this evil Claudius, in further evil, that is to commit further evil? It's curious, the second quarter, and with such, is it not perfect conscience? Is it not, I guess, perfectly in accord with conscience to kill him? But that's going with the same subject from Horatio's direction. Now, Horatio says it must be shortly known to him from England what is the issue of the business here. So you're going to be forced to act, right? Because it's going to be known that you've disturbed his plans. And if he's trying to get rid of you because he's afraid of you, you're going to have to do something else. Now, Hamlet's reply picks up on what we talked before about the beginning of the act, where he says, where I'm suggesting he's gone from everything is fortune to everything's ordained, with no space in between for practical intelligence. I use this term because it's a common translation of phronesis or prudentia in the tradition, just practical intelligence. So Hamlet says, sorry, did you want to?
No, could you elaborate a little bit on how the practical intelligence stands between those two poles that you were between fate and
well, if fortune, the fact that everything appears to be fortune makes him despair of acting. The good suffer and the unworthy take over, and so that means why bother acting? If everything's ordained, So some scholars will say in Act 5, Hamlet has reached with this following remark a new emotional maturity, or with the one about yeah, what does he say? There's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will. Now that is beautiful, but what it actually means, it doesn't matter how you act, everything's ordained, right? So that, again, there's no space for prudence, for discretion, for not acting rashly. You can't, there's no point. I mean, okay, so we come to this, and hopefully this will illuminate, I can make a suggestion about what he's saying here that will help explain what I'm trying to say. So line 83, he says, it will be short, that before what is the plan's failure is known. The interim, the time between now and then, is mine. And a man's, now, he immediately goes from this particular issue, I've got 3 days to kill the king, right? He immediately goes from that to the cosmological view. And a man's life, no more than to say 1. Right? Now, yes, from the point of view of, I don't know, whatever, like say there was a Big Bang 14 million years ago, just the latest cosmological fiction, whatever it is, right? So from that point of view, 14 billion years, a man's life is to say 1. That makes perfect sense. Now, if you can't take that view though, if you're planning dinner, because why plan dinner? I'm going to die anyway. So if I die of starvation in 6 weeks' time, or if I die of old age in 14 years' time, or 84 years, it's all basically 1. It all happens within this space. So what's the point of?
It makes me think, is this sort of approaching nihilism, sort of Hamlet as a nihilist? Somewhat?
Now, this is my underlying suggestion about the play, is that the reason why Hamlet is so attractive to 20th century and 21st century audiences is that, because 20th and 21st century audiences tend to be nihilistic. And there's something parallel, but it's not quite the same. It has both a philosophical and an historical basis. The philosophical basis is that this version, like his misinterpretation or reinterpretation of some aspects of Christianity, which is that the world is defective, there's an eternal good that's completely separate from the world, that makes everything in existence evil, right? And desire itself evil. That is very similar to existentialism. Like there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And ultimately, though, that itself is an illusion. So, Nietzsche, who is obviously very important for existentialism and other schools of nihilism, he's very well aware of this, that there is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And that thinking is itself an illusion of nothingness. And so there's this, so I think that's partly why there's this sympathy with Hamlet from the nihilist. But he's not a nihilist. It's more this radical cosmology that he's developed from 3 or 4 different areas.
Fatalist.
Yeah. So he says, but I am very, and then he interrupts the cosmology, but I am very sorry, good Horatio, that to Laertes I forgot myself, for by the image of my cause I see the portraiture of his. That is, in each case, our father has been killed, and therefore we each want to take revenge. I'll court his favours, but sure the bravery of his grief, which means like the splendour, right? Did put me into a towering passion. So he at the one time that he has this cosmological view that everything is worthless, on the other hand, he has this very powerful desire for honor or recognition, and if someone provokes it, he wants to fight. It says, he's got these 2 things.
I think you're saying, I know this is like an aside, but you're saying like nihilistic audiences and stuff. I feel like there's many of those same passions in like modern young people, you know what I mean? Like they are.
Which ones?
Just the same ones as we see in Hamlet, which is to see that there's no like meaning or whatever, because we can reduce things, blah, blah. But at the same time, they are moved by
the desire for recognition.
Yeah, and
likes on Insta, or
Yeah,
fights
or-
after school.
I'm thinking about Fight Club. Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah, no,
I think
absolutely.
it's-
Because
yeah.
because that's natural.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But what's difficult is that natural emulation hasn't got it hasn't got its natural end.
Which
Right?
mean? I don't know.
I'm just going to refer to people smarter than myself, but so Aristotle in the beginning of the Ethics says, what is the purpose of life? And he says, well, is it money? And he says, no, because money is only useful for buying things that are good. Is it pleasure? He says, well, that suits the answer of a cow. So it's not mere pleasure, because we all, if someone just wallows in physical pleasure only, we don't admire them. Is it honor? And he says that's a more refined answer, but it's not honor, it's at what honor aims at. And that he thinks is human excellence. But that our honoring thing is a reflection of excellence. But in this world, there is no excellence, and that's the existential view. So the people who have who has the highest sense of honor in our society?
Footy players? No, I don't know.
Sorry?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Criminals?
Maybe, yeah.
Like
yeah.
drug dealers or?
Yeah. Do you mean like honor codes? Kind of?
Yeah. Like probably our soldiers and some of our criminals, right? Our soldiers still have it, but we don't have it, we've got rid of dueling, that's, like all those things. And, what's our main, I was going to say, what's the main task of our schooling? To get rid of merit, except in honourable cases of people fighting the system.
Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. No, yeah.
Now, we are at 5:25. Okay, so we're going to watch this longer passage. I thought we should see the end of the play together, so we'll do that. I put that in the email, so I'll get the time and the. Actually, here it is. I think. Yeah, so wait 1 sec though. Okay, so we're going from 3 minutes 31 of Brenner, 3 hours 31 minutes and 30 seconds to 3 hours 56 and 50 seconds, which is Act 5, Scene 2, line 201 to the end, which is line 449. But I just wanted to pick up a couple of things because Brenner interprets them so differently. I just want to provide a brief alternative. So first of all, line 170. This is a minor thing, but just at every turn, Hamlet's talking about writing and acting in plays. And here when Osric at line 170 says, the carriage, sir, are the hangers to the swords. Just before that, line 167, Hamlet says, what call you the carriage? And Horatio says, I knew you must be edified by the margent ere you were done. I knew you must read the marginal note on the manuscript, right? So the manuscripts that were printed at that time, even when they began to print them, manufacture the printing, when was Gutenberg and his press?
1430 something.
Right, so there are books being made by the press now, but even then, like if it's the collected Plato when it came out in Greek in 1585 in England, it still has the marginal notes of a lot of the scholars from over the centuries, so they kept that in. And so,
But even before the printing, they were doing it, of course.
well, that's a continuation of that, right? And that's gone now. Like now we have, notes to foot. But yeah, they were collecting all of those on the way through, and it's just continually there's this reference to plays and writing. For example, in the graveyard scene when he says, "Don't we make parchment? What do we make parchment from? Calves and sheep." And Hamlet says, "It's a calf or a sheep. Who puts any faith in that?" Now he's talking on the one hand about the contracts of a lawyer, but on the other hand, Shakespeare. Right? Shakespeare did not take minute care with the transmission of his text. He didn't put his faith in sheep and calf. No? I mean, he knew he would be famous. He knew he would have an effect. But he didn't, he didn't put his total faith in it. Okay, line 190. Now, at this point, he's been asked at his challenge, and at line 186, he responds by saying, instead of saying, I will meet this challenge, he says, Sir, I will walk here in the hall. If it please His Majesty, it is the breathing time of day with me. Let the foils be brought, the gentleman willing, and the king hold his purpose. I will win for him, and I can, if I can. If not, I will gain nothing but my shame and the odd hits. Right? Now, there's a kind of noble carelessness, negligence about that. Right? Now then, very soon after that, the Lord arrived to say, are you ready? And at line 224, he's explaining how he's going to win. And at line 226, he says, but thou wouldst not think how ill all is here about my heart, but it is no matter. And Horatio says, nay, good my lord. That is, if you suspect this is how they're going to try and kill you, then let's do something else. Let's go for a swim. And Hamlet says, it is but foolery, but it is such a kind of gain-giving as would perhaps trouble a woman. So if he thought like a woman in this particular case, he might actually do something intelligent. He might actually stop himself from being killed, stop the kingdom from being lost to Norway, and take revenge properly. But he doesn't do that. He only reacts or acts rashly. Right? He can't act deliberately. That's the whole, the theme of the play. Because Hamlet says, if your mind dislike anything, like forget your gut, right? Forget your heart. If your mind dislike anything, obey it. Like, can we actually have the intelligence in charge for 5 minutes? I will forestall their repair hither and say you're not fit. Now comes Hamlet's, this is the other side of the coin from fortune, it conquers everything, to everything's ordained, and that's the reason for not acting. We defy augury. What does that mean?
Like
The predictions.
like the birds and that kind of thing.
Right. And in this context, what would that be? Wait, the augury of what?
His sense that it's a trap.
Yes. So we're not going to try and predict, right? There is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow, okay? If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man of aught he leaves knows, what is it to leave betimes? Let be. So anticipating a very popular Beatles song, and like if the Beatles were in charge of British foreign policy, they'd be in even worse state than they are now, because let it be cannot be your foreign policy.
Is this meant to be a contradiction from the start of it to the end of it? We defy augury and let it be. Let be is inaction. We defy augury is action. And this
We defy augury is, well, actually,
yeah,
so
we
what's he
overcome like what's fated badly for us, and let be is walk into the trap. And this is like, I'm just reading it. I think this is from Cantor, is that this is the clash between his ancient and Christian self.
I see. I take we defy augury as in, you can say what you like about the future. I'm not going to try and consider the future. I'm just going to act as if I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I thought it was defy as in like I'm overcoming what is predicted.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that's not how I see it, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And what's the readiness? The readiness is not to fight at any point. The readiness is just readiness to die. If you're not going to die now, it's to come. If it's not to come, it's now, or the only.
I thought it was like being present,
No,
like really
but this is
annoying, like do nothing kind of thing, So that's why I thought there was a clash between those two things.
So the
readiness is all, not action, just ready for that, I don't know. But I get,
I see, yeah, but I think that's partly our language.
Yeah.
That we would, to be ready is to be ready to act. I think he means the readiness is no, just, if you don't die later, you'll die sooner. Which again is not how you plan dinner, or you know, to fight for your country's survival or whatever. You can't act like that.
Yeah, there is a noble resignation and willingness to face death. There's something Socratic almost about that makes it noble, like a willingness to go to one's death without protesting or putting up. There's something noble in that.
Yeah, there is,
Yeah.
but it's also hopeless,
Yeah.
and it leads to disaster.
So the special providence of the sparrow is a biblical reference.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it is.
it's about omnipotence and,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, there is a reference. I haven't
Yeah,
looked it up.
Matthew
Okay.
it's Matthew
X
10,
29.
Yeah, God,
divide into
interest, just as
Yeah.
interested in a sparrow as anything else.
Yeah.
See, it's possible. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, it's obviously there have been great, you know, Christian kings and statesmen and so on who acted in the light of their principles, and so that's why I keep saying it's, you know, whether it's an interpretation or a misinterpretation, it is a kind of reinterpretation of aspects of Christianity as well as classical things, but in such a way as to lead directly to tragedy. So if Shakespeare is teaching something, it might be that our interpretation needs some modification, you know, to prevent it being like this. As opposed to, and the contrast is with the, you know, the description of Henry V. I'll bring that along next week so we can have this discussion of the two ways, this is the unsuccessful non-synthesis of classical, political, and Christian thought, whereas Henry V is presented as the successful synthesis of those three elements. Yeah. Okay, it's now 5:35, so we just have time to watch this.
But feel free to make a cup of tea.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So other elements that we haven't discussed in Act 5 will carry on next week. So from now, yeah, so now we're watching, yeah, 3:31:30.
I think what it's so noble is